It was a dark and stormy night, the kind of night that makes you question every shadow and every creak in the floorboards. In room 42 of the rundown lakeside hotel, Sarah found herself tossing and turning, unable to shake off the feeling of unease that gripped her. The rain pounded against the window, a relentless rhythm that seemed to match the pounding of her heart. Sarah had booked this room as a last-minute getaway, hoping to escape the stress of her daily life. But as she lay in bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She pulled the covers up to her chin, trying to push away the feeling of dread that gnawed at her. Inside, just as she was about to drift off to sleep, she heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible over the sound of the storm. She sat up, her heart racing, straining to hear it again, but there was only silence. Shrugging it off as her imagination, Sarah lay back down, closing her eyes tightly, but sleep eluded her, and every time she closed her eyes, she felt as though something was lurking just beyond the edge of her vision. Eventually, exhaustion overcame her, and she drifted into a fitful sleep plagued by nightmares of shadowy figures and whispered voices. When she awoke the next morning, the storm had passed, and the sun was shining brightly through the window. Sarah breathed a sigh of relief, chiding herself for letting her imagination run wild. Determined to make the most of her getaway, Sarah decided to explore the town. As she wandered the streets, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It was as though the eyes of the townsfolk followed her every move, their gazes cold and penetrating, unable to shake off the feeling of unease. Sarah returned to the hotel early, seeking refuge in the safety of her room. But as she stepped inside, she froze in horror. The room was no longer the quaint, cozy retreat she had left that morning. Instead, it was shrouded in darkness, the air thick with the stench of decay. The walls were covered in strange symbols, daubed in what looked like blood. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest as she backed away, her mind reeling with fear and confusion. What had happened to her peaceful getaway? As she turned to flee, a voice echoed through the room, chilling her to the bone. "Welcome, Sarah," it whispered, sending shivers down her spine. "We've been waiting for you." With a cry of terror, Sarah bolted from the room, racing down the hallway in a blind panic. But no matter how fast she ran, she couldn't escape the feeling of being pursued. She burst through the doors of the hotel, the cool night air hitting her like a slap in the face. Gasping for breath, she stumbled through the streets, her heart pounding in her ears. But no matter where she turned, she couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. It was as though the shadows themselves were alive, reaching out to ensnare her in their icy grip. Desperate for refuge, Sarah stumbled upon an old abandoned hospital on the outskirts of town. With no other options left, she pushed open the rusted doors and stepped inside, the darkness swallowing her whole. The air inside was stale and musty, the silence broken only by the sound of her ragged breathing. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she crept through the dimly lit corridors, her senses on high alert. But no matter how hard she tried to shake off the feeling of dread that clung to her like a shroud, she couldn't escape the feeling that she was not alone. As she ventured deeper into the bowels of the hospital, Sarah's footsteps echoed off the walls, the sound reverberating through the empty halls. She could feel eyes watching her every move, unseen hands reaching out to drag her into the darkness. With a sense of growing unease, Sarah found herself drawn to the abandoned ward at the end of the hallway. It was as though some unseen force was pulling her towards it, beckoning her to uncover its secrets, stealing herself. She pushed open the door and stepped inside, the air heavy with the scent of decay. The room was filled with rusted hospital beds, their mattresses stained with blood and grime, but it was the figure standing in the center of the room that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. It was a woman, her face twisted in a grotesque smile, her eyes empty and soulless. With a cry of terror, Sarah turned to flee, but it was too late. The door slammed shut behind her, trapping her in the darkness. Panic-stricken, Sarah pounded on the door, screaming for help. But there was no one to hear her cries, no one to save her from the horrors that lurked within. As the darkness closed in around her, Sarah knew that she was doomed, trapped in the forgotten ward of the old abandoned hospital. She would never escape the clutches of the unseen forces that sought to claim her soul. And as her screams echoed through the empty halls, blending with the whispers of the forgotten, Sarah knew that she would never leave this place alive, for in the heart of darkness, death awaited her with open arms, ready to claim her as its own.